In this video, I'm going to shed some light on exactly how I interview candidates, and I'm also going to leave this candidate evaluation matrix that I use and will share with you in this video in the description below, as well as in the pinned comment. In addition, you can also find the system that this is attached to at howtohirevirtualassistants.com, which I'll also leave to a card right there that you can access quickly. So getting here on the screen, you can see the candidate evaluation matrix. And what this is and the way that we use it is in a two-stage minimum interview process, so that though I'm the one who's going to be making the hiring decision after having interviewed that candidate on the second interview, I'm not interviewing them in the beginning, nor am I doing the vetting process or posting the job ads. And the vetting process exists through not just the job ad itself, where we ask for specific things for them to do to follow instructions for application, but also back and forth with automations as well as canned responses in the email process itself before we even ask them to interview. In addition, we also use these scheduling question sets that we share in another video, which again, I'll link in the description below, that what they do is make sure that the candidate that I'm going to be interviewing is a top quality candidate who's a really potentially good fit for this role, whatever role that it is I'm hiring for. But all roles get through this candidate evaluation matrix, which I will see what the result of was from the first interview at a 500-foot overview. And then in the second interview, I will also fill one of these out. So as you can see, you have just the simple information that you need. The date of the interview stage, whether it's 1 or 2, and there's 3 because sometimes there's a tiebreaker that's needed. And the third one is an interview that's going to help us get that understanding of who's really the best fit. And down here at the bottom, there's alternative or additional considerations for bonus points, which kind of helps us determine who's the best candidate if it's not already obvious for who we should hire, and then who we should put potentially on the back burner for a follow-up later should we want to hire more than one person for the role. So of course, the interviewer's name, in this case, if I'm interviewing on the second interview, it'll be me. And then we want, of course, the candidate's name and the role that they're applying for. And we always want to include a recording of whatever interview it was. So we'll record through Zoom, and then we'll record directly to our computers, upload that to a cloud. Alternatively, you could use Zoom and just record directly to the cloud. In addition, we have a resume or portfolio link. Now, I want to draw a distinction just in case you weren't aware. Portfolio, that's for more of a creative role. If we're hiring an instructional design, a graphic designer, or a video editor or something like that to show a reel or showcase that, we also want to see their resume. So really, we would just put it down in the other space down here. Now, there is, for this candidate evaluation matrix, areas of assessment that I've put on the second tab here, which it's not an exhaustive list. There are other things that if you choose to use this tool to help you in your interview process, you should add and modify. In fact, if there is any other area that you think should be included in this evaluation matrix for the areas of assessments, please comment below and let me know and provide some feedback for if you began to use this in your own interviews, what your experience has been using it, and if it's been a helpful tool for you. But I just go over some areas that are important to me. Skills and qualifications are at the top. Obviously, when it comes to a role that anyone's applying for, you want a candidate who at least has the aptitude and adaptability to learn the role. But skills and qualifications can be the determining factor as to that's the person you're going to hire right now versus later if time is a factor for you. For us, oftentimes we will hire the person rather than the role. So even if they're not the most skilled at that role or the most qualified person for that role at this time, if they have an aptitude and they're able to adapt quickly and learn, then that might be the hire that we choose. So of course, we've defined what these are. This will assess the candidate, whether or not they possess the necessary skills, expertise, and qualifications for the position. Look for a match between their abilities and the requirements of the job. So that is sort of self-evident. Now here's something that I'll share with you how we evaluate this, but work ethic and reliability. Everybody wants somebody who's reliable, whether it's a business partner, whether it's a partner, whether it's, in a professional relationship or a personal relationship. Work ethic, reliability, these are all very important factors. So we consider the candidate's work ethic, their punctuality, and track record of meeting deadlines. We'll ask these questions about their meeting deadlines, and of course, we'll be able to observe their punctuality. Did they even show up for the interview on time? Reliability and a strong sense of responsibility are super important for maintaining productivity and meeting business goals. This is self-evident, but we move on to cultural and team fit. Now, this doesn't mean cultural like, my wife is from the Philippines and we have to hire people that are Filipino. That's not what I mean by that. Culture is more of consider how well the candidate's values, work style, and personality align with the company culture. A good cultural fit promotes a positive and productive work environment. Now, in the training, the Employee Hiring System Made Easy Virtual Assistants Edition, I'll go into depth about being a good cultural fit, what that really means to me, and I'd encourage you to check that out. We'll link to that playlist, which is a course that we ate the cost of, that's $5,000 for free here on YouTube for you. So if you're wanting to dive into more about how to hire virtual assistants, other than just this, in the interview process, you can check that out. So communication skills is super important, not just how they're communicating with you in the interview and how they'll communicate with you in the role and in their job, but depending on the job that you're actually hiring them for, that's going to weigh heavily on how can they communicate, whether they have good English speaking skills or whether that's even a concern for you in the particular role. So strong communication skills, both verbal and written. We have people who communicate via text message marketing in our own business. And of course, what we would want them to be able to do is communicate via written, right? Written skills at a higher level than your average person. So problem solving and critical thinking, this is not necessarily a huge concern depending on the role. My recommendation is that you look to hire in any position that you're hiring for. If there would be a manager position eventually, hire the manager first, or hire somebody who has the potential to be a manager first. Because what I would hate in my own experience is for me to put myself in a position where I have, as a business owner, relegated myself and pigeonholed myself into middle management, even though I'm the owner of the business. So I want to be able to hire first the person who has the adaptability and the problem-solving skills and the critical thinking of a leadership role. And it is a little bit different than leadership. We'll get to that. You can see it here. So these skills are valuable for addressing complex issues and driving innovation. And innovation is obviously a good quality in somebody who's a leader, somebody who can think critically and propose creative solutions. That's one thing that really resonates with me in a positive way when I'm interviewing a candidate, especially when they're already a part of the team. And I have a couple team members like this. I'll give you an example. That we run into problems all the time in business, okay? One example in particular was a platform that we use for text message marketing changed a lot of areas in the way that they operate with 10DLC a couple years ago. And what they did was, one in particular came to us with this issue and said, hey, these changes went into effect. We're not exactly sure what to do. And it could stop there. But it didn't. They said, hey, we've come up with a couple potential solutions. We thought we could do this or this or this. Do any of these make sense? Do you think they would work out? And it turns out that one of those ideas was actually the solution. And there have been other times where they've done that, and this particular individual did that where none of their ideas for solutions was the solution we went with. But it is a problem-solving ability and a critical thinking skill set that they had that was really a benefit and a blessing to our business. So that's why this is one that I definitely want to put as an area of assessment in this matrix. So aptitude and adaptability, we kind of covered. Skills and qualifications are in alignment with that. That is to say that if they really don't have the skill sets already, but you believe and they are demonstrating their ability to learn quickly, then you can determine if the candidate has that ability to adapt to the new situations, learn quickly, and handle challenges. And of course, that also makes a good leader. So thinking in that chain of thought where it's, I want to hire somebody who eventually can be a manager so that I'm not pigeonholing myself as the business owner into middle management, that is scalable when you hire that way. And I'd recommend you do the same thing. And hopefully this candidate evaluation matrix kind of opens your mind to doing that and thinking about that from the beginning. That is to say, because the main failure spot that I've experienced, and then I know others who I've coached and mentored in the business space, their failure spot in hiring virtual assistants has been to hire too quickly and not vet properly. And then they hire for the role, but they don't just hire the person. and think long-term for growing them into a different role like management. Teamwork and collaboration. Obviously, we talked about this in the cultural fit, but this is more about evaluating the candidate's ability to work well in a team setting and drilling down into that, looking for the indications of strong interpersonal skills, cooperation, and the ability to contribute positively to group dynamics. I've talked to my wife about this. I've talked to my friends and family. I've talked in both personal and professional spaces what a servant leader is. And when it comes to leadership, being a servant leader isn't my leadership is serving you. My leadership is the service. And that's the way in which I approach when it comes to being a leader. So understand the differences between actually serving your team members in a great way as a leader. That is to, if you don't have the official title of a leader, that is to come up with the ideas and also weaving in the critical thinking and problem-solving skills and demonstrating a strong work ethic. So, leadership potential. We've touched on this throughout some of these. I think good leaders are represented that even if the position doesn't have an immediate leadership responsibility, right? It's beneficial to identify candidates with leadership potential for future growth within the organization. And the reason why I didn't put more of a description about what I think leadership potential looks like is because it's all of them, right? It's a combination of all of these, and also just drawing the distinction between, does this person have a desire to help others, to help them, not just to help themselves, but to help them reach their own potential, because that's what a good leader does. Helping and equipping and teaching and training and guiding others to their highest and best, and then getting them to whatever that ceiling is so that they can move on to the next role, and possibly that manager becomes a director, and so on and so forth. So the last thing is that I've included in here, and again, please comment below if there's others that you would recommend putting in this list as an area of assessment, but mine's just the overall sense and feeling, right? And my description here is pretty evident, right? You'll know. Just get a feel for the candidate. Does something not sit right? Are they legit? Are you getting good vibes from them? And that's the final one, that the area of focus that I would use as an assessment. And some specific examples are on the first page, and you can change these to the way that makes sense for you depending on the role and depending on what you're hiring for. But this is kind of just a general. So I look at these areas and you can see that not all of them are equal. There's 3 in the skills and qualifications, but we got 4 right here in the work ethic and reliability, 3 in the cultural team fit, communication skills, and so on. And one of them is 8. Just based off their education, are they qualified? It's not a huge deal because, again, we're looking at the aptitude and adaptability, but also based off their work history, are they qualified? So sometimes this is your college experience, but it doesn't translate to real world experience. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Sometimes you just get out of college and you're ready to go and you're like, I know all of the things that I learned. I'm ready for this job. And then you get that job. Congrats, by the way. And then you're in that role and all of a sudden you're met with this reality of like, I don't really know. This isn't what I learned in school, right? So we're looking beyond the resume sometimes, but there is value to looking at the resume. So do the vetting question sets confirm their skill sets? Now, I do have more training on what a vetting question set is. I did briefly mention it earlier. I'll link a specific video to that in the description. But just to clarify what that is for just a quick second, we will offer an interview. And when we do, we schedule via Calendly. You can use whatever you use. And it gives us the ability to add 10 specific questions. We use that as an opportunity to actually vet candidates a little bit further on the first interview. And we're not actually focused more on the first interview, on their qualifications and can they do the role. We look at their resume and say, okay, their resume looks like a good fit. They followed all the directions through our initial vetting when we said, don't respond via this portal, which we use onlinejobs.ph. Then instead, compose a separate email and ask, specific questions, get those answered in that email. Put the title to be very specific. Send this or send that, depending on the role. So if they did all those things, and then we're communicating back and forth with them using canned responses for vetting, and they pass that bar, then we're like, hey, you might be a good fit to interview. Like, let's get in front of you and get to know you more personally to see if you'll be a good cultural fit, if you have the work ethic, and we're evaluating communication skills as well, and aptitude and adaptability rather than the role. So the first interview in our 2-stage interview process is that, and that's the reason we have those question sets, because we want to know before the onset of the first interview, who's this person that we're interviewing. We want to get to know you, and we also encourage them to interview us as a company. So of course, in the work ethic, did they show up on time? If not, did they make an excuse? Because we're very gracious. Sometimes things happen, especially if we're hiring from the Philippines and it's monsoon season, and then their electricity goes out, and hey, even if they have a backup generator and the internet and this and that, we've heard them all, right? We've heard emergencies. We've hired some people who didn't show up on the first interview and completely ghosted us because, they had a family emergency. These things happen. So we want to know, not just did they show up on time, but did they start making excuses? And if it was an excuse, was it actually just a reason? So we want to make sure we measure that against our conscience and understand whether or not they're being legit. Hence the overall sense/feeling at the bottom there. So did they answer the scheduling question sets? If no, was there a good reason, right? That's part of it. And I know we put skills and qualifications, but we have in two different interviews. The scheduling question sets are really focused in the first interview, as I mentioned, on their personality and their goals and their dreams, and would we be a good fit to help them get to that place? And then in the second interview, it's more focused on the situational, in this particular role that you're applying for, what would you do if? So we want to see if they answer those questions appropriately. There's no wrong answer. There's no right answer. We just want to know, did they actually answer them? And then, if they didn't, did they make an excuse? And part of this, hey, was their camera on? With this line item, as all of these are changeable and adaptable, we just put in here, did they make an excuse for it? Because again, it goes back to the overall sense and feeling. Are they legit? Are they honest with us? And of course, that could in and of itself be an area of assessment, but we kind of put that in the category of the overall sense and feeling. And one really critical piece to this is we want their camera on because we want to know, did they present themselves well, not just in the way in which they were communicating, because that's more in communication skills, but physically where they decided to go. Did they have a quiet, private space? Or, funny story, one time where they like this person, where I interviewed them, they were on camera, which is great. They were right in front of where a bed was in the background. And they had this, I guess, girlfriend, wife, something, in a towel walking back in the background, laying on the bed. And he had showed up in like this A shirt and wasn't really presenting himself well. So all that to say, he actually didn't end up getting the position. But it's important, like how you do anything is how you do everything. For the most part, if you show up like that, you're probably where else does that show up in your life, right? So we want somebody who's going to at least make an effort to present themselves really well. Now, they don't have to wear a suit and a tie. They don't have to wear a collared shirt even necessarily. Just show up in a quiet space with not people walking around in the towel half naked behind you. Okay, so cultural fit. These are a couple ones that I went through as an example for you. Do they have a willingness to help others? We kind of briefly touched on that. Do they speak well of others and past experiences? This is important to me, and you may resonate with this as well. When I'm speaking to somebody else and they talk disparagingly about somebody else, it's only a matter of time before, if you guys part ways or even if you don't, they're speaking bad about you behind your back. That just shows up multiple places. So if they have really negative things to say in like a hateful or spiteful way for somebody else, you can be sure that they're going to do the same thing for you and of you when they talk about you somewhere else to someone else. So I don't want any of that. I want to make sure that they don't cause a rotten apple spoils the bunch on our team. It's not even just about me, because they can talk bad about me all they want, but I want to protect the team that I currently have because I care about them, and I want to make sure that I don't bring a rotten apple into the team. So do they spend their time learning or lounging? Now here's the deal. It's okay if you spend your time lounging around, right? But at some point, any time in your day off or any time in a vacation or whatever you're doing, do you have a desire to learn? Not even just about this role that you're interviewing them for. That's my take on this. It's, do you feel like, man, I don't know enough? Or do you feel like a know-it-all where you don't have to do anything else? You've hit the precipice of human knowledge and you don't care to learn anything else because you're good the way that you are. Sometimes that's okay because some roles don't require you to try and innovate or do anything like that or be a leader. But it's just a good thing that I'd like to know and rate them on. I prefer somebody who wants to continue to learn. I continue to learn, my partners continue to learn, and I know that you're watching this because that's you as well. Communication skills, obviously, do they speak well enough for the role? Doesn't matter if they speak with a clear, specific dictation in the English language or not. I don't care. I just want to know, is it enough for the role? Because just because their English is a second language, possibly, if they're a virtual assistant overseas, not in the United States, doesn't matter. This is a very global world, and that's why we're talking about hiring virtual assistants. So communication skills also, can they convey their thoughts succinctly? Heck, better than I do, right? Are they able to actually communicate what they're thinking? Does it take a lot of words? Can it take less words? This is usually applicable for like a phone sales role. Are they able to actually get out what they're thinking? Sometimes it's a language barrier. Sometimes it's just, I don't really know how to articulate things well. And if they don't need to articulate things well, that's okay for the role itself, but you also want a certain level of an ability to communicate, maybe even business acumen, depending on the role, with you. So you can communicate tasks and they can understand it, which goes into the problem solving skills and critical thinking. Do they need a lot of direction? I was on an interview recently with somebody who I gave them the answer ahead of time on a role play, and I said, hey, this situation is you are reaching out to an agent. You are only going to ask them if they got the email that you sent with your offer. And that's your main goal, just to make sure they had eyes on it and then to get their feedback on it to see if it was a legit offer, if that was something the seller would consider. This is in the real estate investing space. And then we did the role play and they completely fumbled and dropped the ball. And it wasn't because of a lack of preparation on my behalf. It was because they weren't following directions. So needless to say, that individual didn't get the role, but that's what we want to observe. We want to observe, can they take direction and run with it, or do they need a lot of direction? I was as gracious as I could have been with that person, by the way. I said, hey, tell me how you think that went. And then they said, well, I don't think it was that great. I said, why is that? He said, well, because I didn't know what I was doing. And we talked about it. But at the end of the day, great guy, not a good fit for the role. So notwithstanding that, critical thinking skills, problem solving skills, I put this under the area of assessment of, do they need a lot of direction? Can they follow directions? And of course, the idea is with all of the vetting that takes place before, they would be able to follow directions. And that's why we put those vetting sequences in place, whether it's the job ad itself, the email vetting sequences, which are the automated responses and the canned responses that you manually send out, and the question sets that are for vetting as well. Also, do they bring a potential solution with a problem? We talked about this, and that's something that's really important to me. So, aptitude and adaptability. Now, I only put one here because I think that also goes with the overall sense and feeling, and it also goes, it gives me a sense of their aptitude and adaptability with the questions that they ask me. So it's really, there are some concretes, but a lot of it's ethereal. So here in the role play scenario and debrief, did they arrive at a lesson? Right? So we always try to leave the candidate who we're speaking with in a better position at the end of the interview than whether they get hired or not, what position they were in when they came. So if it's like a cold call or a lead manager role or whatever it is, when we're having a conversation with them, we want it to also be educational. So we want to give them feedback, even if we choose to not hire them and they get a job somewhere else, well, they will have a better skill set than when they were in this interview. So that's always my goal, but I want to know if they can adapt and if they have an aptitude for learning and that they got the lesson that I was trying to convey to them to help better their skill sets in a particular area, assuming that I'm the right person for that, right? We're talking about general hiring, so I don't know everything. If you're hiring a full stack developer, forget about it. I don't know about any of that stuff. That's why I use ChatGPT. So anyway, teamwork, collaboration, some examples that I include here, scenario-based. How do they deal with coworker issues? Right? We kind of talked about that a little bit. Will they teach others and will they also learn from coworkers? Receding, whether or not they would potentially be a good leader, which we have 2 examples of for your information, and this is just what we use. Do they demonstrate an eagerness to see others succeed? And of course, I drilled into that just a little bit ago. and what I believe that looks like, servant leader, and all the other things we talked about. Now, have they proven in theory responsible enough to hold leadership? This is theoretical, right? This is just the theory. So you don't know them. You haven't seen them prove themselves in the role because they're not hired yet. But this is where you can ask them questions about how they interacted with coworkers before. Did they have a leadership position? How did they, when they had a problem with an employee that they were responsible for managing, how did they approach that, right? We want to see evidence of somebody who's humble, somebody who also has a desire to lift others up and lead in that way, where their service is good leadership to help that person correct course, not to just demean that person and put them down and say, you suck, you shouldn't have done it this way, you're not learning. That's not the type of person that we want to bring onto our team. And again, that's part of cultural. We want people who, even if they're not necessarily leadership potential quality, and they might not need to be, but they just have that it factor where they care about people. Give a crap is the technical term, I think. So that leads us to the overall sense, and we talked about that. Now, in addition to the candidate evaluation matrix that we've reviewed here, there is an interview outline, and this is the same outline that I use for the most part for introductions and for the outros of every one of the interviews that I conduct, no matter what the role is. So it's applicable across the board. We're going to go through that in the next video that you can find right here. So check that out if you're interested in how we do it. There's a PDF that when you get to that video, you can download it for free as well. You're not going to want to miss it, where we're going to make it easy.